Thank you all for joining us. I'm really excited to see so many folks here and excited to kick off the new year with a very forward-looking topic. I first reached out to Phil when I learned about his primer conference, and I was so intrigued by the concept of speculative design that I wanted to bring him here to learn more. Phil founded the Design Futures Initiative, which is a nonprofit organization that organizes meetups internationally around the world for speculative futures, and also organizes the Primer Conference, which I'm very interested and excited in myself, and he'll be hosting it in New York this year. In addition to being a futurist, Phil is also an educator. He has run workshops around speculative design and digital transformation around the world. Currently, he's an experienced design director at McKinsey. And prior to that, he led a team of designers at GE Aviation, working on software for airlines as well as the industrial Internet of Things. So with that, I'd like to ask you to welcome Phil Balaktas for Design is Speculative. Thank you.
Thank you, Kai. Thanks, Google, for having me here. I'm going to talk to you about speculative design. My day job is I am an experienced design director at McKinsey, doing a lot of different work. I'm going to talk a little bit about my journey. And I think speculative design is best explained through examples. I've tried to define it many ways. A lot of people have tried to define it. I think there's a lot of different terms out there. But if you Google speculative design, you might find critical design as well. But for all intensive purposes in this talk, we're not trying to displace any specific term. We're just trying to give it a nice umbrella so we can have a point of reference. Who has actually heard of speculative design before? Oh, this is probably the most people that I've seen that have actually raised their hand. There are several different terms that might come up: design fiction, discursive design, interrogative design, adversarial design. Again, just for this, we're just going to talk about speculative design because all of it is sort of speculating on something. And we are going to be talking a lot about the future. Everyone loves to talk about the future, right? So this is a definition, one of many that I've put together for it. It's a way to manifest possibilities. And that can come in a number of different ways. You can manifest it in stories, in artifacts, in scenarios, in environments, to prepare us for inconvenient challenges and facilitate a more desirable, responsible path into the future. Not just the challenges, but also the opportunities that the future brings. So here's a nice little diagram. I think this has been refined over the last year. So a colleague of mine, Elliot P. Montgomery, who is a professor at Parsons, the new school, has tried to map out, so that, as it's noted there in very fine print, the scale of the circle doesn't necessarily indicate significance or the size of the field or the size of the communities. He's just trying to put all these different terms on the map. You see that science fiction is on here, future studies, strategy, design thinking, design itself, and then speculative design is sort of in there as well. Here's another bubble diagram I found today. So there's another organization called Speculative EDU, and they ran an analysis of hashtags that are being in posts in social media and that were related to speculative design. So there's a lot of different topics and industries that are talking about this term, this field, this methodology. I'm not quite sure what Mind F hack is, but that seems to have a pretty prominent bubble on this chart. So we don't like to call ourselves fortune tellers or predictors of the future. We do like to have some sort of foresight to understand what the future challenges are. But when we think about the future, we don't like to think of it as a straight line. We like to think of it as possibilities or alternate futures. We always talk about futures because there are many possibilities. You can think of it sort of like a cone. This is a pretty popular diagram, and when we teach people about futures, this is one we sort of start with to kind of get a baseline perspective of how to look into the future. So everything kind of lies within the cone of possibilities, right? The things that lie outside of the cone at this point right now, based on your time frame, might be things like teleportation or lightsabers, that kind of thing. As you get closer into the center of the cone, you get into the more plausible, and then the more probable. What's likely to happen, things we're pretty sure are going to happen. So let's just take a popular topic such as AI. We know AI will continue to develop, it'll get smarter, it'll get faster. maybe add some quantum computing on top of that. It'll get even faster. And then there's what could happen within the plausible, and then, again, the possible. So that just sets the framework, that there are many different ways that time and events and trends, we sometimes call them signals, can play out. And this sets the basis for where we want to experiment, understand things. So the really interesting areas we can explore are sort of on that realm, on the outer realm of possibility. Things where we want to kind of install imagination, look at impact and implications. What's the knock-on effect of this design response in the future? What could happen, right? What might happen? And I think this is a very relevant topic today, especially with all of the questions around privacy and data. How could things break? Of course, you can imagine the future and all those implications can be quite large. So we have to start to try and investigate and see what we want to actually care about. And this is sort of part of our mission. So again, I'm going to show you a range of examples, a lot of videos as well, to try and explain some of the different ways people have tried to access and investigate this topic. I'll start with one of my favorites. This is by Anthony Dunn and Fiona Raby. I think this project is from 2007, maybe? So the project's called Design for an Overpopulated Planet, Foragers. The signal is that the United Nations says in the next 40 years, we will have to produce 70% more food. 40 years does seem like a long time, but think about how much food that is. That's not just food for us. That's water. That's plants. That's animals. That's a lot of food for an overpopulation. So given that as your launching point, what might that future look like? Well, this is one response. And you can unpack this in many different ways. What would we as a society might have to be determined to do in that world? How might we, if we were able to, let's just take a technology, harness chemical biology, the chemical process that animals use to extract nutrients from soil, air, water, and encapsulate that into some kind of machine? Could there be some sub-society that would actually roam the land, forage the land, and actually extract nutrients, much like animals do? What would the form look like? Would they mimic animals? And so this project, again, these were just fabricated objects meant to be a critical investigation around that issue, and then also form and function. And it presents more and more questions around what's the world going to be like, and what will we have to do to address it, and compromise. Object Solutions did an exhibit with MIT Media Lab. So this one is called Love Optimized. That was the name of the exhibit. This project's called Neuralign. So just imagine if you were sleeping soundly on your first date at dinner, and these diodes were sending impulses between you and your partner and trying to sync them with, to see if you were actually, compatible with your partner. The intimate utility meter. So smart homes are becoming more prevalent. So what if we had a smart meter that only delivered services to your home based on the connection in your relationship? So if you're having a great relationship, you're very connected to your partner, spending a lot of time with them, great, you have all of your utilities. But if that starts to fail and the home notices that you're not spending as much time, it starts to turn off. And again, this is just a picture, but it starts to present another way of looking at how things could play out. And some of them, they're a little bit more tongue-in-cheek, but again, presenting more questions. Another graduate from the Royal College of Art, which is where Dunn and Raby were teaching critical design, is Joseph Popper. A very interesting investigation. This was called Oneway Ticket. He built this entire capsule, basically, out of wood and cardboard and styrofoam. And his question was, what if you had to send a human on a one-way ticket out into space? You can imagine the questions around what a human would have to go through aboard that vessel. What are the challenges, not only from the logistics, how you get there, but the food you would eat, the psychological challenges you would have, all of those things, and start to investigate, the human psyche at that point. Not too different from what we're trying to do with Mars. Elon Musk says that to be part of the Mars One mission or to send humans to Mars, you have to be willing to accept that this is a one-way ticket to Mars. So what if we do get there? What are we going to do? Of course, a lot of study and research is going into how we're actually going to survive, terraform, but what else? So Carlos Monleon Gendel did a project called Martian Wine. And it was really around understanding if we could actually grow or have wine on Mars. So he actually did an experiment looking at Martian soil and emulating it. And you can actually do this because if you, there's a process called carbonic maceration. If you actually take grapes and expose them to a lot of carbon dioxide and pressure, they actually ferment from the inside out. So he looked at the soil composition of Mars and created these vases based on that. By the way, if you notice, it says Mars' atmosphere is 95% carbon dioxide and only 0.3% oxygen. So that's, wine might not be the first thing that we're looking for there, but I'm not even sure why we're going there. But if we do get there, we could actually make some wine. These are the vessels that he created. Again, there's a number of things that you could start to look at as far as living on another planet. One might be just how do you bathe yourself? Now, of course, we might actually have a bathtub, but the astronaut Scott Kelly said once he finished his one-year mission on the ISS, said there's nothing, personally, he says, I've learned that nothing feels as amazing as water. So this was just Christine Liu, she's a student of Central St. Martin's, was looking at not only the devices, but how you might actually bathe yourself. I think on the left is the actual bathing unit, and the other one is a drying unit of getting that out. Now, there's probably a lot more science that's involved around like bathing yourself on Mars. But again, looking at other aspects of it. What's everyday life on another planet? Aggie Haynes, she's one of my favorite designers. She's very interested in the body and manipulating the body. So we can do this today, right? And usually it's for vanity. It's called plastic surgery. So you can imagine in a world where climate change is a serious issue, which it is still today, but the temperatures around the planet are much higher. Would we modify our children to actually live in that environment? How would you do it? And what are the ethics around that? So you can see the flaps in this, this is not a real baby, this is a model. The flaps in the skin, it's sort of like a heat-sinking computer. The more surface area there is, the more that the heat can escape. So this child is actually designed to live in hotter temperatures and work longer hours. Alexander Daisy Ginsburg, also looking at bacteria. She was working with, I think, also Central St. Martin's, looking at how to program bacteria. On the left is a cup glass made of keratin. Do you guys know what keratin is? Anyone? It's the protein in your hair, your skin, and nails. It gives it strength and structure. That's a glass made of keratin. So there's a number of questions, not just like, would you actually sell this at Target or Home Depot, but these could be keratin made from another human being, your family member. On the right, a pollution-sensing lung tumor. So taken from a pathology of a heavy lung smoker and glass fabricating bacteria. I don't know if that part's real, but the idea is that it would turn red and change colors based on if it's exposed to a lot of toxic gases. It's beautiful, right? There's actually the form and function of it, and then there's also the utility of using this in emergency situations also. She also did another project called EcoMaya, and this is a video I'll show you.
As designers, we worked with the team to explore EcoMaya's potential as they were developing it in the lab. And together we imagined a timeline proposing ways that living colour could evolve over the next century. These scenarios, some of which are shown in this film, explore the different agendas that could shape EcoMaya's use and in turn our everyday lives.
One of the first real applications for this technology may arrive quite soon. A cheap disposable biosensor for testing groundwater contaminated by arsenic.
Bacteria could also be used to produce natural colourings and dyes. By 2015, there may be a profession of people who hunt for new pigments in the genes responsible, bringing them back for use in the food and textile industry. By 2039, you can go to the supermarket and buy this simple probiotic yogurt for cheap personalised disease monitoring. The yogurt drink contains EcoMaya bacteria, which establish a colony in your gut. They monitor for chemical signals that indicate the presence of a wide range of diseases. If they detect a disease, they start generating the corresponding coloured pigment, producing an easily visible output to prompt you to seek your doctor.
Design can set agendas. Again, this was real technology that she was working with, but you can see how she started to project it over time and try to understand what are the implications. I think if you watch that video further along, it talks about these subcultures and other organizations that start to riot and question, like, what are we doing? We're farming too much of this. And, we don't tend to look past 10 years because after 10 years, it gets a little bit fuzzy and blurry of what really is going to happen. But that's usually a nice time horizon for us to try and speculate on these different, effects. So you can set agendas with these scenarios, stories, or scientific investigations of how to explore our world and how it could be, and start to set policies. I really believe in this, that this is a type of thinking that we can actually start to design new policies based on, what we're experiencing today. We're trying to get out of the reactive state of designing, even though, we're with agile software, throw it over the fence and see if it breaks and then fix it. That seems to work very well. It's very effective with making products that people love, but there's a lot of other emerging technologies that can actually be very dangerous to us and be very life-threatening. Here's a project that 23andMe and Lexis were working on.
You. There are billions of you. But there is only one, you. So what if selecting your next vehicle focused on what truly matters? You. Introducing Genetic Select by Lexis, the world's first service that uses human genetics to match you with the car of your genes. Through a partnership with 23andMe, using their proprietary DNA genotyping, one small saliva sample will unlock your DNA, telling us where you're from, where you're going, and now, how you're going to get there. Within 48 hours, your handcrafted Lexus will be delivered to your driveway. Based on your chromosomes, everything from the model, styling, and performance capabilities will be crafted exclusively for you. Inspired by your favorite scent, a genetically personalized new car smell. If your DNA markers reveal a susceptibility to freckling, protective UV tinting. Even an enhanced windshield matched to your personal prescription. Genetically predisposed to high caffeine consumption, enlarged cup holders. And best of all, operating your vehicle no longer requires a key. The perfect driving experience is in our DNA, because it's also in yours. Experience craftsmanship at the genetic level. Experience amazing.
Even she couldn't, be serious about it. I have trouble holding a straight face when I show that video. But again, videos or vision videos are a really good platform to tell these stories. So getting a little bit more serious, there is a project that the UK government conducted back in 2015 called The Future of Aging. It's a very dense study, and you can find it online, find the report online. But they did a series of workshops across different cities in the UK, trying to understand what services, public or private, might people need in the next 30 years. And they presented them with a number of different scenarios, some just kind of showing them pictures of what the future might look like and getting them to react. How would they feel about it? What are their needs? So government services are actually a really great place to practice speculative design, because sometimes it takes a long time for it to develop and roll out. And there's a lot of different factors, economically, culturally, that you have to be very sensitive to. And you can actually create that longer time horizon. And this is a quote from the project. So design fictions enable a form of storytelling that allows us to imagine unrealized objects in use, also providing alternative value systems for designers and potentially policymakers. So this was, again, at the time they said this was one of the first times that the government had actually sought out speculative design practice to try and conduct these experiments. These are some of the pictures. I'm sorry they're a little bit low res, but you can see at the top, it's a public versus a private scenario. It's the same scenario, but you can start to see that there's a couple things that are very different. Can anyone point out some of the differences? Just call it out. The parking lot. Yes, it might be kind of hard to see, but yeah, the parking lot, very good, is Facebook. Can you see the signs on the river canal? One is sort of signage, and the other one is sort of an advertisement. So again, it was to kind of provoke public opinion around like what kind of services would you like? Would it be okay for you to take a bus run by Facebook, a private service versus a government public service? And of course, the opinions were sort of across the board, thinking that privatized companies would try to take advantage and raise prices, but they would be on time as opposed to the government-run services. And the bottom left, you can see this store says Green and Sons, noting the multi-generational institution here of robot repair. And again, they just presented this and tried to understand this is a potential service that will exist in the future. How do you feel about that? And they came up with a giant map of responses that really looked into a number of different dimensions: working lives, lifelong learning, housing in neighborhoods, central role for families, healthcare systems, and physical, social, and technological community. Again, trying to use these as launching points of like, what are the first things that we should start to develop that society at this age will probably be more comfortable with as they grow. But again, an investigation in one point in time that they have to continue to investigate as things change. And they can start to divert. Again, designs can set agendas if you really want to try and avert the agenda or lean it towards one thing or another. You can start by looking at something like this. So in Dubai, of course, is a very interesting place. Again, a city built in the middle of the desert, started from oil money, right, in the 70s. But they knew back then that the oil probably would run out at some point. Dubai is now a very international business hub connecting the East and the West, and they've grown quite a bit. But again, always been sort of future and forward thinking, trying to understand sustainability. And so they're doing a pretty good job, but they're also investigating a lot of things, a lot of emerging technologies. So this is an exhibit by Tellart. Tellart had a major contribution to it. And this gentleman over here, Christian Irvin, who actually works for Google, had a huge part in creating this exhibit. They started, I think, in 2014 or 2015. And it was an annual exhibition just to showcase emerging technologies and kind of create an immersive environment of the future and see, and inviting the public to come in and cite the public opinion. Again, same as government at UK, to try and figure out, like, is this the future you want? Is there anything that we're missing? They had an autonomous car prototyping lab where if you don't have to drive the car, what else would you want to do in this vehicle? They had like an office car, an exercise car with a bike, a lot of different things. And since then, there's now a permanent installation of the Museum of the Future, a permanent organization, part of the Dubai government. It's called the Dubai Future Foundation, something like that. And so they're constantly looking at emerging technologies and trying. The first 3D printed office is there. But this is a really great exhibition. I think this is from 2017. And again, immersive. Some of the first ones, it used to be called the Future of Government Services, where that street that I showed you earlier was literally a street with like construction drones, augmented reality. And this is just a tour of, I think this is a food prototyping lab, where it would actually create food based on your body's needs. Brain augmentation, exoskeletons, and these were just devices. So again, these are actually real, plausible devices that could actually come to fruition. A city kit, self-building building. This autonomous machine would go out and actually use the materials around it to rebuild roads or build new buildings. And this is my favorite one. It's called Mood View.
Have you ever wondered what people really think about you? Have you ever had trouble convincing people of your ideas? Well, despair no more. Introducing Mood View, the most advanced social intelligence product on the market. Mood View's sensitive facial microexpression recognition reveals people's subconscious feelings and attitudes in real time. The Mood View Social Coach then draws from a data bank of over 450 trillion social interactions to suggest the best way to respond. Thanks to Mood View, you can read people like an open book and be sure that you say the right thing at the right time, every time. Mood View. See how people really feel. Mood View will not be held responsible for an overproliferation of friends or increased workloads due to newfound business opportunities. Mood View's microexpression data bank brought to you by the UAE Hypermind.
So they're not all like that. There's a lot of not that one's not serious, but there's a lot of very serious technology propositions for you in this environment. This is what it's going to look like when it's finally finished. A beautiful, beautiful building. They're putting a lot of work into it. I hope to visit it someday. So at the time, I was so fascinated by this project, not only because it was a government-instituted project, but just like the whole platform of it. You create this massive immersive experience, you invite people in, get the reactions, like, okay, so what now? What actually happens? And so I contacted the then strategy director, his name was Andrew Hirsiger, and I was like, this is great. The design fictions you created are amazing. And he said, he hated the word fiction. He said the prototypes aren't based on fictitious realities. They're based on real, provable drivers and trends, moved down predictable ways. Of course, no one knows what will happen in the future, but this process hinges on the most plausible future based on rigorous research and study. So sometimes you look at these projects and they just kind of feel like, oh, that's just kind of a funny way of looking at the future. But if you just look at MoodView, it's based on a lot of technology that is actually very available today. Right? The only thing it's missing is like the contact lens where you can do that. But you could imagine yourself holding up a phone and doing facial recognition and understanding people's moods. It's happening today. But at the time, it felt, like it was sort of science fiction. So a lot of the work that's there is not just imagined, though there is a dimension of dreaming of the future. It is based on real research. And this is really what we try to push, that it's not just, imagination. So this work is being used at a lot of corporations. Some of the earliest examples of this was Apple. Has anyone seen Knowledge Navigator? Great. I learned about this in grad school and was truly fascinated about it. I'll just play a little bit of video. This is a vision video.
You have 3 messages. Your graduate research team in Guatemala, just checking in. Robert Jordan, a second semester junior, requesting a second extension on his term paper. And your mother reminding you about your father.
Surprise birthday party next Sunday.
Today you have a faculty lunch at 12 o'clock. You need to take Kathy to the airport by 2. You have a lecture at 4:15 on deforestation in the Amazon rainforest.
Right. Let me see the lecture notes from last semester. No, that's not enough. I need to review more recent literature. Pull up all the new articles I haven't read yet.
Journal articles only?
Fine.
Your friend Jill Gilbert has published an article about deforestation in the Amazon.
From that video, can you identify a couple of things that exist today? Just raise your hand. Siri? Alexa? Someone else said tablet? Anything else? What did not exist in 1987? Probably a very key technology for this to actually be real. Search engine? Yes. What else? Voice recognition. Yes, Siri. How did Screech, who I think the little guy looks like Screech, what does he do? Internet. Where was the internet in 1987? At what point was it in development? Was it commercially available? No. Was any of this commercially available? I think the foundations for this technology did exist, and they were looking into it. But it took them about 20 years to create the iPad, maybe longer than that to do Siri. And so you can start to see how they just looked at trends and signals today, emerging technologies, and pushed them out. And how could they all come together to create an experience? And this is, again, vision videos are very effective in that way. And I don't know. I don't work at Apple, and I've never seen the R&D room. But this may have been in different formats or forms part of the roadmap of can we get to the Knowledge Navigator. I think it came out at one point, and there was sort of a tablet that came out but failed. But they eventually got there. I was sort of on the fence about showing this one because we are at Google. Has anyone seen the Google Selfish Ledger? Wow. Oh, these two guys. Oh, it just so happens that this gentleman is one of the people who actually helped put it together. So I'm not going to set this up for you, but this was a video that was meant to be internal. It was a speculative design, a design fiction piece, and I'll just let you watch it.
As this line of thinking accelerates and the notion of a goal-driven ledger becomes more palatable, suggestions may be converted not by the user, but by the ledger itself. In this case, the ledger is missing a key data source, which it requires in order to better understand this user. In order to plug the gap in its knowledge, the ledger begins searching for a device which delivers the required data when used. From this list, the ledger begins sorting the options most likely to appeal to the user in question. In situations where no suitable product is found, the ledger may investigate a bespoke solution. By analyzing historical data, it is increasingly possible to discern qualitative information such as taste and aesthetic sensibility, which may be used in the creation of a design proposal.
So if you didn't get it, the system, the ledger, didn't know something about the user. What was that? Weight. And so what did it do? It tried to build a scale based on the user's preferences, right? And so again, this video got a lot of attention because it leaked, and a lot of criticism, and a lot of debate around what Google was really trying to do. It's speculative, completely speculative around, and it wasn't all creepy, though some people thought it was. So again, what do we have to do to consider design for the future? And I'm going to share a couple of very, very basic frameworks to get started. We showed the futures cone earlier. And then here's something I like to call retrocasting. I didn't come up with this term, but it's sort of a combination of backcasting, which I'll show you later, and also just looking into the past to understand how the future could play out. Here's just a basic timeline with some key technologies. 1998, Google arrived. 2007, the smartphone, sharing economy, VR. Does anyone know what the little globe is? Not the Watson one, but the one beneath Alexa. Quantum computing. If you're not familiar with quantum computing, look it up. I think there's a lot of promise in quantum computing. It's very, very hard to do, but it can, once it comes to maturity, can do wonders with the way we process information. So in that amount of time, a lot of cultural shifts has happened. If you understand Moore's law, the law of accelerating change, which was based on just the number of the size of a transistor you can put on a microchip, and that it would just the speed would double, but the size would also shrink. So if you apply that to how technology has affected society, we've shifted the way we do things. Can you remember the last time you had to remember a 7-digit phone number? Right? Like we rely so much. So the cognitive load, that's just one example of the things. Now think about autonomous cars. What other cognitive loads are we going to, offload onto some other technology and forget? I have a really hard time like with cursive, just handwriting because I'm always typing. And it's weird, like unlearning that. I used to be very good, but now I'm like, it feels very strange. So in the last 20 years, if you can think of that, apply Moore's law and think about what could happen in the future. In the next 10 years, there's going to be a massive change. And this is just sort of a rough estimation that the amount of change technologically, economically, culturally can actually accelerate also. And so from 1998, if you remember how things were then, it's going to be like that in the next, that massive shift can happen in a much shorter period of time. Now, futurists are also a part of this community, people who have been doing this for many, many years, looking at strategies, understanding economic trends and how businesses should shape their strategy. They have a lot of frameworks as well. There's a book called Think Like a Futurist that talks about the forces of change. If you think about the resources, so even if you just think about like early man, resources were like fire and rocks. And then there's technology, which is like the tools that created that. The demographics of the people that manage those tools, and then the governance around that. Any changes in any of these dimensions can start to shift how things go, how technology is actually funded, and how it actually evolves, and then the people, and it's this whole pyramid. Now, there's a lot of different factors to look at, but if you look at those as trends and signals, you can start to see, start to kind of shape a picture of what the future might be like. So backcasting is also a very simple framework. Look at the future. We do this a lot at my company and other companies I've been at. And it's just like road mapping, right? Where do we want to go? And then you backcast into the present around what are the key milestones and elements that need to be true for this future to arrive. And then you can actually add that futurist framework on top of that and say like, okay, what's the world going to be like? And how do we have to shift that to get to that future? Apply that on top of the futures cone also, you can start to see multiple futures. Now that product or that idea or that future doesn't live in a vacuum, right? Just like things are very different today than they were 20 years ago. right? Think about everything that's different today, the policies, the political climate, the environmental climate, ethics. All of these things that are very different in today's world are there, things that we need to consider. And there is a reciprocal relationship between all of that for those things to be real. But again, so you can look at multiple futures. What's the future we want? What's the future we don't want? And how do we want to navigate that path to avert ourselves from the things we don't want? Or change policy so it becomes the things that we want? Because some things are imminent, and they're going to arrive, and we're going to have to deal with them. So, speculate the ecosystems. What does it feel like? What are the challenges and rules, the states of the world and technology? And start to determine the social and cultural implications. What impact will we as designers, our role, have on society? Not just the product, but where will we be? Will we be the policymakers? Will we be defining ethics? And how does it change our behavior socially, psychologically? All those things you don't normally think about, but now we're starting to deal with. Now we're starting to understand. We can understand the world today and see how humans might accept that in the future. Yes, the world will be different, and they might accept it differently, but we are animals. And there's some things you can predict, some things you can't. Another very basic framework is called the futures wheel. So take anything, put it in the center. AI, robotics, synthetic biology, cellular agriculture, and think about the direct implications. Direct implications of autonomous car, we don't have to really think about driving anymore. Less accidents. We don't like to think of like, what's the product in the future? And when we think about the future, typically, as we see in a lot of workshops we do, is people just think about mobile phones. They're smaller and faster, and they're in your head, or they're in your eye, or we're connected via this and that. But yeah, that's just the product. What does it actually do to us? And should we go there? So this was a workshop that I participated in, run by the Near Future Labs, and really great workshop. So we basically entered, and there were all of these news articles from the future. And I think at the time there was a drought in California, so there was a few about the drought. And they asked us to create a quick start guide for an autonomous car. So just like your Fitbit, you're going to have like potentially like the pamphlet that's like, how do you get started? What happens if there's an emergency? What happens if you leave your kid in the car? And we were forced to think about all of these implications. Who manages the insurance? What's the policy around data? These things are going to be connected to the internet probably. What happens if it kills someone? So all these things, and this was just one of the pages. You can find this book on their website. This is like child safe mode. So yeah, if you leave your child in the car, is there a button that you can press on a remote? And what does it do? Does it turn it around? Or what if you fall asleep and you end up like in the ocean or like in a very bad neighborhood? Like what do you do? Where do you go? Or if you lose control of the car? So very good experiment in looking at just the implications of autonomous cars. Because in March, a very famous ride-sharing company actually had their first fatality in Tempe, Arizona. So this was a Volvo that was modified. It was an autonomous car. There was a driver who was actually watching Hulu. The Volvo itself had sensors in it that identified an obstacle on the road, but it had been deactivated because of this other company's technology that had taken over, that they actually deactivated it. So it did see that there was a person that was crossing. It did not react in time, and there was a fatality. It's bound to happen. There are many things, again, that are imminent, and I'm pretty sure they did not plan for this to happen. They looked at every single possibility, and they tried to keep this from happening. But now they're going back to the drawing board, and they're going to have to work it out. They will have to. And we will all have to think of these things as these things start to propagate throughout the world. So advocating for future design thinking is very difficult. And we get a lot of these questions of like, how do we bring this back to their practice? Awesome, yeah, we should be thinking about ethics. How do I tell my CEO or my product manager that this is something that we should be building into our design process and it's something we should care about? And so the example I like to give is, I used to work for GE Aviation, and this is a test cell. It takes about 10 years for that jet engine to actually roll off the line, from concept to actually like being deployed on an aircraft. A lot of that time is being tested. You put it through the test cell, we throw rocks at it, snow, ice. There are actually frozen birds, which I think so I don't think they murder the birds, but they throw foul basically in it to see what happens if there's a bird strike, which is a very real problem. To see if a fan blade breaks off, and see if we can design so the blade doesn't actually hit the fuselage and do more damage. We have to do this because it's risk aversion. there's a lot of technology you're working on. Now, it's not necessarily the jet engine, which, by the way, is one of the things, along with physics, that keeps the plane in the air. There's a lot of technology you're working on today that could be, that deserve this type of risk aversion investigation. These are just some principles. This could be used for design thinking. Any sort of new methodology, new way of thinking you want to bring back to your company, you have to understand your company's values. What do they care about? So with airlines, they cared about tickets and butts and seats. So we tried to anchor it around what they believe is like people who are buying their tickets. Now that we're designing for those people in the future, what about all the other infrastructure and systems and all of the different ethical challenges around privacy and using their data for other things to sell them more tickets? If that's the step that you have to take to get them to listen, then that's fine. Find something they really care about, and then create champions. Make sure they care. And they could be a number of small experiments or vision videos or whatever it might be to help create a new agenda for that company. New agenda for your boss. Hidden impact, influence, and ecosystems. So these are the things that we want to think about when we're sort of evangelizing this. What is the hidden impact of this product? What are the influences, and what are the ecosystems that we're going to have to live in? There are, of course, I'm talking about a lot of negative things and a lot of risks, but there's also opportunities in the future. And this is one of the things that we're really focusing on as our mission. So, like Kai said, I am the president and founder of the Design Futures Initiative. We have 3 products, really. There's sort of the Primer Conference. So we first started with the Speculative Futures Meetup, which we started in 2015. We started in San Francisco, and now we are in 25 cities. And then the Primer Conference was meant to be the annual conference for the meetup. And we are in our 3rd year, 4,000 plus members. In May, we were 5 chapters. Today, we're 25, going on 28. We're all across the world. There's been this massive organic response to this kind of thinking, and everyone is just kind of jumping up, and we're inviting futurists and science fiction authors and strategic foresight practitioners and business strategists to come and have this conversation and to just get involved in the discourse of really thinking about the future. And Primer is meant to be sort of the conference where we gather everyone and we prime them for the challenges and the opportunities of the future. So this is in New York next year. We've got a really great lineup. Paola Antonelli is going to be speaking, and a few others. We'll be releasing the speakers pretty soon. We have a EU conference, which just started last year. So we're not quite sure what we're doing with Primer. We're just sort of helping it organically grow. We don't know if there'll be a Primer China. We're just letting the community pull us in that direction. The third product really is what we're doing at DFI, running workshops, doing the meetups. This was a lab that we did where we had 6 SMEs, subject matter experts from different sciences, so biotech, pharmacology, plant genomics, and we paired them up with designers. We said, think about the future of disease. This is a project called Genome. They looked at these 3 signals, plant genomics, biosensing, machine learning, and they went to the kitchen and they built this thing. And you basically give it your blood, it analyzes your health needs and grows medicinal fruit. I thought it was very beautiful. Literally made of plastic, pulled out of the kitchen. But there's a mobile interface on there. Again, they believe that a mobile interface was going to be the way to connect to it. We do some light assistive consulting. We worked with Smith Group, JJR, and helped them create a charrette looking at the future of AI-driven health clinics. So this was pods, a personal on-demand service where if you didn't have any humans, what would that clinic look like? Would you just sit in it and it would analyze you? And there was a number of different responses that came out of that. We also helped some students. This is Shihan Zhang. She is a graduate of CCA, California College of the Arts. This is a really great project. So she's from Shanghai, where, of course, there's a lot of pollution, and she was really looking at how could you take back carbon and monetize it and commodify it back into a new economy. And she came up with a number of different responses. This is an algae suit made by Chanel. I think there's a Chanel logo in there somewhere. For skin farming, for some of the hipsters, there's Mr. Beard. There's the Moss Beard collection.
The World Carbon Bank connects you to carbon pickers all around the world. You can browse their personal profiles, including carbon offset stories, locations, and stock analytics to plan and decide your carbon purchases. For example, you may want to buy from the Indonesian farmers who operate oxygen farms instead of running palm oil tree farms which destroy the forest and release tons of carbons back into the air. Or You can purchase your credits from a dairy cow farmer in California who collects methane directly from their cows by integrating the collection system with existing milking stations. You can also buy credits from Pacific Climate refugees who run their carbon pancake truck in Sydney. They use sodium carbonate to absorb CO2 from the air, which turns into baking soda for pancakes.
It's a really great project, personalcarboneconomy.com. Okay, so I'm really excited to tell you about this next project. So in last year, we were trying to expand DFI. So until then, it was just like events that we were doing. And we really wanted to create more programs and do more workshops. So we engaged with the Boys and Girls Club of San Francisco. And literally, I walked in there with some leftover catering stuff from Primer, and I was like, can you guys use this? I just want to donate it. And I brought to them this idea that I wanted to work with kids. And the hypothesis was, what if we use futures frameworks, the futures cone, those kind of methods, to help youth identify life, career, and social challenges and design a better life pathway? I wasn't interested in helping these children design new products, so that's probably a fun experiment for them. But we're trying to see if we can kind of appropriate the methodology to help them like find challenges. So Boys and Girls Club, if you're not familiar with them, they deal with a lot of at-risk youth. So we tried to figure out what age did we want to work with, and everyone kept telling us middle school was probably good. When you're in high school, a little bit distracted with puberty and all those things that you get distracted with when you're a young adult. And so we ran the first workshop, and we said, if you had all the money in the world, what would you solve? And this one student said, I would solve the problem of racism because it's not fair. It's very difficult. For me, it was very difficult to work with this child because I just didn't know what to say to them. Because you can be so impressionable on children at that age. And I was just like, I was stunned about just how affected they were. But the one thing we did discover is that they are affected, but they didn't know how to articulate why or how or what to do about it. They sort of associate themselves with the adults that they their parents. And so they didn't have any sort of problem framing capacity. Not capacity, but they just didn't know how to frame the problem and synthesize around it. So we came up with a program to kind of start with design thinking principles. How do you identify the problem, unpack it, and then figure out how to actually deal with it in a safe, non-harmful, productive, constructive way? And we ran a couple workshops, just really working with them. And we're still doing this. We did bullying. We're about to do ethics, which is going to be a really tough subject. Again, these kids this is not their school that they're meant to go to. It's sort of an after-school program. So, they're very rowdy, but they get very engaged with this stuff. And we had them do the futures cone exercise, and we basically painted the cone on the floor, and we said, create the different lives of this boy and tell us what's happening in this child's life. And they really got to be imaginative around like how they could start to understand, like embody the future at these different points in time. And that helped them try to understand multiple futures. And there are that even though they're in a state where they're dealing with something that's very difficult, that is imminent for them, they can find a way around it through these methods. We've got a bunch of developmental assets that we're installing into it, positive values. This is part of Boys and Girls Club curriculum, but we've chosen these 3 categories of things we want to install in this program. So, positive identity, social competence. And we've got this program that we're working on till, this year. We're going to see how it goes, but eventually we want to kind of enfold it into their annual curriculum. So it's part of their everyday classes and workshops. Are you guys interested in this stuff? If you are, there's plenty of books. Discursive Design is not out yet. It's by Bruce Tharp, who is an amazing futurist and speculative designer. Again, there's futurist books in there. Speculative Everything is the seminal book by Dunn and Raby, which is usually a good starting point for a lot of people to want to just start looking into speculative design. I started teaching or kind of doing speculative workshops at GE just by doing games. And I ran a couple games. Here's 3 that you can go and pick up. Thing from the Future, I'm not sure how available that is right now. I know that it sold out at one point, but just keep looking for it. Superflux Instant Archetypes just came out. It's also by Superflux, which is an organization, consultancy, that's doing a lot of this work as well over in the UK. Their founder came from the RCA as well. My final quote for the day is, the future belongs to those who can imagine it. This is our world, of course, and we have that power to create it. And design is, tomorrow you're designing. That's the future, right? Yeah, of course, we're all design futurists. But hopefully you understand, the message here is not just to, put the thing out in the future, but to understand what it could do to society, and the ethical challenges. I really believe that policymaking and ethics will be at the center of our toolkit in the near future. I think we should all be very proactive about that. Thank you very much. Thank you for coming. Thanks, everyone in the back. Appreciate it.
Thank you. Thank you, Phil. And thank you all for coming this month, and thank you for the really thought-provoking overview of speculative design and the frameworks and ways that we can all start thinking about designing for the future. Very relevant for this series, which is created to make a space for designers to come together and talk about our role in crafting the future. So join us next month for Design is Data, and follow us at Google Design. Thank you very much.